Hello, welcome to New Trews with me, Russell Brand, and Dr. Brad Evans. Thanks for doing this, Brad.
Pleasure.
We're going to talk about the terror attacks recently in Paris, and we're going to use the Fox News' coverage of it as a fulcrum so that we can convey ideas which I hope are an alternative to those conveyed on Fox.
We start by talking about Paris, and it was yesterday when a gunman with an assault rifle killed a police officer on the Champs-Élysées. The gunman was shot dead by police as he tried to flee on foot. 2 other police officers and a bystander were wounded.
Brad, the first thing that strikes me when watching Fox's coverage of this sad event in Paris is the kind of glamorization. I mean, news, even as a medium, the way that it's strapped, the words alert, the gunman, the sort of gun-wielding police, it immediately seems like a dramatisation rather than a rendering of information.
Mm-hmm. It's completely dramatised, and it's done in a way which is very formulaic. It's very similar to the ways in which actually we saw the attacks narrated in London recently, and it kind of removes it from any sense of actually meaningful context. It becomes actually a pure spectacle. It becomes something which is almost reminiscent of a Hollywood blockbuster, something which, despite, as you say, that the attack itself was horrific, but let's not lose sight of the fact there was one gunman killing one person. But you lose all sense of perspective around this, because the way in which the media will operate with this is to basically try to present something which is part of a truly serious global war effort in which all our lives are on the line.
Right, I see. So that's a very deliberate editorial choice. And while the murder of the policeman is obviously an awful event, the way that it's being presented is, you would say, is sort of intoxicating and deliberately leads us in a particular direction. Mm-hmm. What is that?
Well, that particular direction is precisely the ramping up of security. Now, whenever what strikes about this event is that the moment the event happens, it's immediately diagnosed, like the London attacks, as a terror attack. Now, it might prove in the longer run that it wasn't, but that, of course, that's the default setting. So terror always needs to be ruled out of the situation. And, of course, by the time you rule it out, then the public is kind of forgotten anyway. So what matters, of course, is to try to stake it in this question of, this is terror. You should be fearful. We need more security. Now, whenever the word terror is invoked, the first question you need to ask is, well, who benefits? It demands a certain form of intervention, which is heightened securitization, heightened militarization, which just so happens to come at a time when the French election's taking place. And of course, one thing you can kind of see is, if this attack is ISIS, it's precisely what ISIS would want.
So the objectives of the terrorists and the objectives of the state align perfectly. Thanks, Brad.
President Trump, in the last half hour, has tweeted out, quote, "Another terrorist attack in Paris. The people of France will not take much more of this. Will have a big effect on presidential election."
So in a way that supports like a lot of Trump's ideas that we are it escalates this to sort of a global event as opposed to a sort of a localized event, and as a component of a global narrative. One of the things I've noticed, Brad, and I thought was interesting, and because it's something I've only just observed, is that in both the recent London terror attacks and this Parisian attack, they said like the attacker was previously known to the police. They'd already been that, and I sort of thought, well, what's the point of them using that particular bit of information in the news, or like what could be the agenda there? I started to wonder, will that ultimately be used to say that we need to be more draconian, that there needs to be more intervention, more arrests, more retention, arresting people for less serious crimes, a kind of preemptive minority report state where people are like, well, you could become a terrorist at some point. It seemed to me that the talking about those people being known to the police was a way to sort of precipitate that kind of action.
Yeah, and also I think what it also does, it underwrites that actually all this investment that we put into security isn't actually worthless, right? So there's a sense of saying, well, at least we kind of knew this person was capable of doing this kind of stuff.
Yes, but I think it also says, Brad, that we need to be yet more, there used to be more force, more measures taken. So it's sort of like you feel that there's this sort of powerful incentive to do more.
And the more you securitize, this stuff never gets taken away. So it's layered upon layered upon layered. And actually, I think there's also quite an interesting parallel with actually what happened with the Borussia Dortmund bus as well. A very similar narrative came out around the Borussia Dortmund bus, around this was Islamic terror, this was something which was violent and devastating. Now, of course, as we know a couple of days ago, he was actually a white financial speculator. But you don't see the Daily Mail headlining white financial terrorist, right?
Right.
So it becomes a kind of, there's a very clear scripting around the types of profiles we expect to be associated with terror and ones that we don't.
It looks like another terrorist attack, and What can you say? It just never ends. We have to be strong and we have to be vigilant, and I've been saying it for a long time.
So, like, Trump himself is saying like that it never ends, and indeed that was the sort of focus of an article we saw by Simon Jenkins, and it's something that you've written about extensively, Brad, that if the response continues to be militant, if it continues to be sort of a military issue as opposed to a criminal issue, that it's the escalation of the problem as opposed to the amelioration or sort of anyway tempering it, controlling it, dealing with it.
Yeah, and the war without end has very clear political advantages. You know, if you look at, for instance, Donald Trump's domestic ratings are, you know, one of the lowest for any incumbent president. But you can instantly distract attention to the international, to the foreign, to the demonization of others in a way which becomes very conveniently distracting. But of course, war in itself allows him to appear more presidential. And this is, you even see the more moderate media in America now kind of saying, well, he does look kind of more presidential when he drops the non-nuclear bomb on Afghanistan.
Why do you think non-nuclear is an important term?
Well, non-nuclear kind of indicates that nuclear is now the default. Right.
Well, what, we're going to use nuclear at some point?
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, the non-nuclear kind of instantly gets the term now into the vocabulary. And it's kind of interesting. You know, there's this sense of, okay, this is a war into the future. We think that we want to end the violence, so therefore we're going to drop the mother of all bombs in a nice gendered way.
I know, it sounded like that. Mother of all. This is a, hello, darling, it's the mother of all bombs here. Oh, it's nice to meet you. Fucking hell, you've just killed everyone. Yeah, but I wasn't nuclear.
And suddenly Marine Le Pen, who is the far-right candidate, she could she's been all about the borders, all about security. She could actually see a surge.
She's just saying France first, and she's a little concerned about the borders and the French people, and not so concerned about being politically correct.
Yeah, that's the problem here, is people are being so bloody politically correct that it's causing some sort of post-colonial meltdown where everyone feels fragmented, fractured and terrified the whole time. So I suppose immediately, even in the sort of commentary on an American news channel, we can see that the continuing relationship between people being frightened and a move to nationalism and a move to the right, that fear does lead you to sort of the familiarity and comfort of nationalistic arguments. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's a wonderful quote by George Orwell when he says, nationalism is the habit of categorising human beings like insects, so whole blocks of millions can be conveniently labelled good or bad. And Orwell kind of gets that. And I think the one thing you see today in terms of this contemporary politics of fear, it's precisely what Wilhelm Reich understood all too well in his book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism. You need to manipulate the desires of the masses to basically want their own persecution. And this is what you find with this politics of security.
So there you are. If there really is a war against terror, if that war against terror were ever to be won, it could only be won by something that was not terror. And that, ridiculous though it may seem, would be compassion, altruism, and a refusal to be afraid. Whilst it is terrible and tragic that people are being murdered on the streets, the way that we perceive these events, the way we report these events, is making the situation far, far worse. Is that fair, Brad?
Absolutely.
That's some true news. Subscribe here.
Is a tool that is abused to fool you and to leave you scared and confused. Trews is like the news. If the news was true, I want some Trews. Let's have some Trews.